It's so cool.
Yeah.
It's very bright orange. It's different from the picture.
Seeing these.
No, maybe I didn't have one. We were there from 1988 to 1992. So, what year did they get popular?
Well,
They kept going.
kept selling it.
Okay. That shiny texture, it does look like someone owned it. It's really held up. Stuff on it. Like an alternative to plastics.
Well, this was the celluloid. The only celluloid was stays back in building.
Hey, they made Chibarashka. You know what they. The real thing. Sounds like no one's. Here comes Paris. Yep, so many people, you can't fit in here. So there are a few more chairs coming up, but I guess we'll go ahead and start. Just a reminder, there's no film this Friday. Next film is on the 27th of March, and it's Life of Chat. But Canada Reads is next week, the cote-saint-luc competition. It'll be in the multi-purpose room. It's 5 librarians debating 5 great books that we think should be the ones that you select. So 18th, but it's usually 2 o'clock. This time it's at 11 o'clock in the multi-purpose room next Wednesday, the 18th. That's it for me. Here is Dr. Joe Schwartz, the science leader.
So you're all here because you don't know if you're eating the protein. chances are you're not. And you'll find out why. Anyway, the age-old expression, you are what you eat, right? You've heard this many times, you've seen pictures like that many times, right? Quite cleverly concocted pictures showing that we really are made of what we eat. These are relatively new, but these are classics. Go back to the 1800s. Nice works of art. And there are all kinds of images like this, insinuating that we are what we eat. Here's one. I actually showed this one at a medical conference once, and I got some negative comments on it because they claimed that it suggests that people get fat because they eat wrong, right? Instead of saying that there's all kinds of other reasons why people get fat, etc. And I don't actually take those comments to heart because although obesity is indeed a very complicated business, I think, as I've told you before, the laws of thermodynamics will never be repealed. And if you are overweight, it is because you're taking in more calories than you're expending. So yeah, there is certain truth that food is linked to obesity. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. We're here to discuss this business of you are what you eat, particularly in relationship to protein, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, if you go on Amazon, or indeed if you go with the most of cities, you'll find loads of books like this entitled "You Are What You Eat." Some of them are reasonable. Many of them are written by nutritional quacks, and they have their own gimmicks, etc. But the first time I think that we heard anything sort of resembling the "you are what you eat" phrase takes us back, believe it or not, to the late 1700s, and Brian Savarin, who was sort of a French philosopher and foodie, who wrote one of the first books on food and taste. It was, of course, mostly about taste. But in there, he had a classic line, which was this. And as you can see, it's just tell me what you eat, and I'll tell you who you are, which is sort of in the realm of you are what you eat, but this is not exactly in the modern sense. He was more inclined to take a look at what people were eating to determine their social stature, their social class. So that, if you were poor, you ate differently. So what he was saying that if he knew what you ate, he was able to determine whether or not you were, poor or what sort of social class you were in. He really wasn't into nutrition, although when you read the book, there actually is one fascinating little comment there. He actually did notice that people who ate lots of sugar and who ate lots of white flour tended to be overweight. But anyway, he really wasn't focused on nutrition. He was more focused on sociology. But the first time that in North America we had someone talk specifically about food as nutrition was a chemistry professor by the name of William Olin Atwater. And this was way back, as you can see, 1894, when he came out with this book about essentially telling us what to eat. Really, in the theme of you are or what you eat. And he had some classic observations, including that if you do a lot of hard work and exercise, then you need greater calorie intake. Interesting enough, he never addressed women as being different in their caloric needs. And as you can see, I mean, these were some legitimate comments, very much like we would make today, except for the last one, where he downplayed the importance of fruits and vegetables because he didn't think that you were getting enough calories from them for the amount of money that you were spending on them. But he was only interested in calories, because this was, remember, this was before any knowledge about vitamins, before there was any knowledge about the antioxidants and polyphenols that we talk about all the time. So the main concern in those days was whether or not you were getting enough calories to sustain life. Interestingly enough, the first time that there was a more specific mention of the you are what you eat was in an ad. And for all things, it was for Fleischmann's yeast. So here's this ad for Fleischmann's yeast. And the caption: many of the things we eat have lost their valuable food properties through refining and other such commercial preparation. And the message here was legitimate in that you are what you eat. Of course, they were pushing their yeast as being a highly nutritious food. Interestingly enough, this sort of attack on processed foods back then is the same kind of thing that we're seeing today, right? With all of the commentary about ultra-processed foods. So, in the early 1900s, there was this steam building up about linking what we eat to health. For the first time that the expression that you are what you eat specifically appeared was in an ad by, of all people, as you can see, United Meat Markets. And there is the phrase, literally, you are what you eat. And it was in reference to a book that had just been published. And that had the title, You Are What You Eat. And this is the first time that we ever saw expression voiced exactly like that. And it was by Victor Lindlar, who was someone that today we would describe as a wellness influencer. Self-proclaimed, no proper education, but he pontificated on what we should eat, some of which was reasonable. He actually suggested the consumption of a product that he called Seritan, which was to regulate you, because in those days, everyone was concerned about constipation as being the great evil. So he recommended this, and it has a very interesting title. Can anyone figure out why that name Seritan is interesting? Nature's meat backwards, right? So this would be the implication that something that is natural is better than synthetic. Actually, what this was an extract of a plant called Pantego ovata, which you're probably familiar with because it is sold today as Mystique. So way back then, they were already cognizant of the value of this plant extract or the metamucil. Now, Lindlar's book, You Are What You Eat, asked a number of questions. And here you can see some of them. What food should I eat to lose weight? What foods can help to relieve arthritis? Can certain foods aid in correcting unpleasant breath? These are exactly the kind of questions that people ask today, right, about food. He had answers. They were mostly wrong, but he did have answers for these things. But anyway, historically, this connection is interesting because of the link to this expression that you are what you eat. Something that today, of course, has been elaborated upon. And there are today a number of very legitimate scientific articles that come out on a regular basis with some version of the notion that you are what you eat. And usually they focus in on eliminating ultra-processed foods and eating more wholesome natural foods. Now, of course, we have heard a lot about this steering away from ultra-processed foods recently because of what is happening in the US and with the release of the so-called 2026 dietary guidelines manufactured by Robert Kennedy Jr., who has as I told you before, absolutely no business being in the position that he is in. This is an affront to humanity, that he got a position. He's a scientific imbecile. He knows nothing, has no scientific background. And some of the stuff that he says can be just, dismissed as outrageous nonsense. But some of it is highly impactful, such as, of course, his attack on vaccines, which is going to be paid for in the US and elsewhere in the world too. Not only with people's health, but also with money, because it's going to be very expensive to treat all the people who are coming down with diseases that could be prevented by vaccination. But anyway, in terms of nutrition, he has some standard lines about these guidelines that we're going to stop the attack on saturated fat, stop the attack on war on proteins, etc. There's never been a war on protein. This is just nonsense. Yeah, there is sort of an attack on saturated fats, which is very, very justified, because we know that eating saturated fats, which are mostly found in red meat, and dairy products such as butter, are linked to high cholesterol, which in turn is linked to cardiovascular conditions. Anyway, he has come out with the dietary guidelines for Americans, which has turned the nutritional pyramid upside down. And things like whole grains and fruits and vegetables are lower down, and at the top is red meat, which is really bizarre given everything that we know today about nutrition. Now, there are recommendations in there about what to eat, but the fact is that it is very bizarre to make a comment about increasing red meat consumption and increasing fatty food consumption, and sort of trying to justify this with nutritional basis, and that is not so. I mean, as you can see, the recommendations to eat more red meat, it just flies in the face of everything that we know about nutrition. Now, not everything that they suggested is wrong, because, as I've told you before, sometimes even a blind squirrel finds an acorn, and maybe it's the blindest of all squirrels out there. But not everything is wrong. Their recommendation for protein is actually in line with what we have recently learned from research. And the recommendations today basically reflect modern science, and we're recommending more intake of protein than used to be the case. So this is what I want to take a look at today, because I think this is significant, especially as far as seniors are concerned, because many do not have adequate intake of protein. So this is what we're going to focus in on, and what protein is, what it can do, what it cannot do, and give you some guidelines and some numbers on trying to figure out whether or not you're eating enough. But I think it's always interesting when you get into a discussion like this, is to go back in history a little bit, because, as we've said, I'm sure many times before, if you don't know where you've been, you're going to have a very hard time figuring out where to go. History is very important. And I think it's also, interesting to know rough time frames of when we learned what we now know. So we're going to first go back a long time, more than 200 years, to Mulder, French chemist. And he was the first one really to use the term protein. And this was in a paper. Here's the paper. The paper, of course, was written in French. And he had described how he had been able to isolate 3 specific substances from common everyday items, like from milk, from blood, etc. And he found that these had some common features. Now, back in those days, they didn't know anything about molecular structure, but they were able to determine the elements that were present in these substances. And he found that these chemicals that he had been able to isolate had some common feature in terms of the ratio of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen that they contain. And he very excitedly wrote about this to Berzelius, a Swedish chemist who was probably the leading scientist of the era. And he wrote to Berzelius saying that he had isolated these substances from milk and blood, etc., and that he thought that these were the fundamental building blocks of matter. And he thought that this was really, really interesting. And Berzelius wrote back to him, and here's this rather remarkable letter of great historical importance, because it is the first time that the word protein is ever used. He suggested the word protein, which derives from the ancient Greek, and you can see he actually had the ancient Greek letters in there, for first, or of prime importance, recognizing that these substances, which at that time they didn't know exactly what they were, but they were present in common items that came from living sources, so thought that this really was something important. So he coined the term protein, which means first, most important. Well, exactly what proteins were figured out by Emil Fischer, a German chemist, who in 1902 got the chemistry Nobel Prize for this. It was the second Nobel Prize ever awarded. The Nobel Prizes were introduced in 1901. And so Fischer got the Nobel Prize for figuring out what these substances that had been isolated from these living sources were. And what he determined was that these substances were all made of fundamental units called amino acids, which could be joined together very much like links in a chain, first to make small chains called peptides, which would then be built into larger chains, and these were the proteins. So by the early 1900s, it was known what proteins were chemically. They were polymers of amino acids. Well, of course, the greatest association with protein is with muscular strength. You ask anyone, what are proteins, what's their importance? You usually get the answer that we needed to build muscle, which is true, as you will see. However, there's much more to proteins than the fact that our muscles are essentially made of these molecules. There are many, many different kinds of proteins, because there are many different amino acids that can be joined together in many different ways. So it's not only muscles, the enzymes, which basically determine just about everything that happens in the human body. Enzymes are biological catalysts. Without them, chemical reactions in the body just don't occur. So enzymes are absolutely critical to all living systems. But enzymes are proteins. So it's much more than just muscles. We talk, for example, about digestive enzymes. Well, these are cranked into the stomach from the bloodstream to break down food so that its components can be absorbed and used by the body. So enzymes are critical. I'll give you a little schematic here. For example, if you eat proteins or you eat starch, these first have to be broken down in smaller units so that they can be absorbed into the bloodstream and be used to build the body, used in many different ways. What enzymes do is they facilitate the breaking down of these. For example, proteases are enzymes that will break down proteins into their component amino acids, which are then absorbed into the body, and the body can use those amino acids to build the proteins that that it needs. But there are also enzymes that are called anabolic, which means building. The enzymes that I just described to you are catabolic, which means break things down. Anabolic enzymes, for example, are used to build DNA, which is the most important molecule in our body because it really is the blueprint for everything that happens in the body. So those are proteins as well. And then we have some hormones, which are proteins. Human growth hormone, for example, which allows us to grow, is a protein, and insulin, which of course is critical in allowing glucose to be absorbed into cells, and that is also a protein. So now we've established that proteins are important for muscles, they're important for making hormones, they're important for making enzymes, and as we learned from Emil Fischer, they are made of amino acids. Well, what is an amino acid? It is a very simple molecular structure. All amino acids fit into this general structure. They have a carbon with a double bond with oxygen, a carbon next to it that has a nitrogen on it. That's what they are. The first amino acid was actually isolated long before Emil Fischer showed that proteins were made of amino acids. In fact, this goes back over 200 years when Robert first isolated a substance, a pure substance, from asparagus juice. Why on earth he studied asparagus juice, nobody knows, but he was able to isolate this crystalline material, which eventually came to be called asparagine. They didn't know its molecular structure at that time, they just knew that this was a novel substance that could be isolated from asparagus juice. So that was the first amino acid that was ever isolated. Today, we know that there are 20 amino acids. And as you can imagine, if you have 20 potential links that make up a chain, you can make an infinite variety of chains, right? Depending on just which links you put in and what sequence. So proteins are very complicated molecules because they are all built on these links, and you have 20 such links that you can put together. Now, as I told you, our muscles are made of protein, our enzymes, hormones are made of protein, so the body must be able to generate these. And it does so by linking together the appropriate amino acids to carry out that function. There are 9 of the 20 amino acids that are known. There are 9 that are essential, meaning that we have to have them in the diet because our bodies cannot make them. Some of the amino acids our body can make from other amino acids, but the 9 essential amino acids cannot be made by the body, so we must have them in the diet, which is not difficult to do because proteins occur in all kinds of foods. And they, of course, therefore, are made up of numerous different kinds of amino acids. And they can be found in animal foods, and they can be found in foods that come from plant sources. So certainly there's a large variety of proteins that occur in nature that can be consumed. Now, not all of them contain all of the essential amino acids. And you may have heard this, or if you remember your high school biology, where they constantly talked about complete proteins and incomplete proteins. Complete proteins, like meat, contain all of the amino acids that we need. So there will never be a short supply. However, some plant foods do not contain individually all the amino acids. But if you eat enough of the plant foods, they will furnish all of the amino acids. And it used to be said that if you are a vegetarian, you have to know how to combine your proteins properly. For example, the message was that you eat beans with rice. Because the amino acids that are missing in beans are found in rice, and therefore these are complementary. Okay. This used to be taught, it was in all of the textbooks. It is wrong, as we now know. This business of, it's called a plant protein fallacy. It turns out that, no, you do not have to eat these at the same meal. As long as you are eating plant foods of enough variety, so that together they have all of the amino acids, the body will keep them and put them together the right way. So you don't have to worry about combining your plant proteins. And in fact, it is certainly possible to have a very nutritious diet based on just plants. Now, one protein that is talked about a great deal, and should be, is collagen, because it's the most abundant protein in the body. It is sort of the scaffolding on which the body is built. It is in our skin, it is in our bones, our tendons, ligaments, etc. So of course it's very easy to make a comment about this, that we should be consuming this. And there, of course, are all kinds of products out there that contain collagen, and they will make all sorts of claims for body building. Most of these claims are not justified. Collagen is a protein. It is going to be broken down in the body into amino acids. It is not absorbed as collagen. So, I mean, there's no way that the collagen that you eat is going to go to your skin and build your skin. This is just nonsense. But of course, you can make it sound as if it is not nonsense by saying that, yeah, your skin has collagen, your bones have collagen, therefore you should be eating the stuff. No, there is no rationale for that. Collagen is one of these incomplete proteins. And, you know, the alternate argument that they use is that, yes, it's true that collagen cannot be absorbed, it will not go directly to your skin through your bones, but when it's broken down into its component amino acids, the body will reassemble those amino acids to build the collagen that it needs. That doesn't make sense either, because the body can use any protein to break down, store the amino acids, and then reconstitute them. So no, there's really almost no value in taking collagen. There's some very minor evidence that, as you can see here, that it may have some benefit on joint discomfort, but the evidence really is very weak. It's I think mostly the placebo effect that we see there. But there's one other very interesting reason that we need protein, is that some of the amino acids that are produced when protein is digested are the starting materials for what we call the neurotransmitters, like dopamine, like noradrenaline, like serotonin. These are molecules that are very important for mental health and for many other functions. So there's no question that intake of protein is important, but nevertheless, whenever it comes up, what people think of is building muscle. That's what they associate with proteins. The fact is, of course, that muscle is built of protein, but not only protein. There is more water in your muscles than there's protein. So the muscles are made of only about 18% or so protein, but nevertheless, the common belief is that if you want to build muscle, you have to eat your protein, and they talk about mostly red meat as being good source of protein, which it is. But eating protein is not going to build you muscle. This is a common misconception. The only way to build muscle is to exercise your muscles. You gotta sweat it. You gotta do the work. Now, of course, you do have to have the raw materials. Muscle is made of protein. So you do have to have dietary protein. But in order to use that protein to build muscle, you've got to do the exercise. So this, the idea that a bigger steak will give you bigger muscles, that is absolutely false. Of course, when we talk about the importance of protein and protein intake, we need to look at numbers, right? Numbers are the currency of science. If we're going to talk about the importance of protein, you have to have some idea of how much to take in and what the importance is. Well, today, we have a pretty good idea because there has been a lot of research in this area. The recommendation for the minimal amount of protein that you need per day in order to sustain yourself is about 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. This is the amount that is needed to meet the body's basic needs. This is not the optimal amount. This is what you need in order to survive. But we're not looking only at survival, right? We're looking at proper muscle maintenance. Now, maintenance is not the same as muscle building. And in order to build your muscle, as I said, you've got to do that exercise. But muscles are constantly breaking down and reforming. Your muscle is dynamic. It has always been formed and always been broken down. So, of course, to reform what is broken down, you need amino acids, which come from protein. So those have to be furnished by the diet. So the minimum amount is this 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So we're talking for, an average adult, 60 grams as the minimum, but that's the minimum. So if someone is a sedentary adult, is not involved in anything, you can get by with about 60 grams of protein a day. That can be met relatively easily. However, if you are doing any kind of exercise where you're trying to build muscle, then of course you do have to take in more because you need the raw materials to build that muscle. But really, if you think about it, no matter how much exercise you're doing, how much muscle can you build in one day, right? A gram, 2 grams, something like that. So that amount is easily met by the diet. But you also have to remember that you need protein to make your enzymes, to make your hormones, to do the muscle repair, etc. So that's where this minimal comes in. Now, how do we know this? How does anyone find out what is the minimum amount of protein that you need? Actually, that was not so difficult to do because protein is the only macronutrient. Macronutrients are protein, fats, and carbohydrates. That's what makes up, right, the weight of everything that we eat. Well, you can calculate your protein needs because protein is the only component that we eat that contains nitrogen. So you can take volunteers, feed them different amounts of protein, calculate the amount of nitrogen that is present in that protein, and then measure the amount of nitrogen that is secreted in the urine, in the feces, and in the sweat. This can be done. This is scientifically, this is not such a difficult thing to do. So by knowing the amount of nitrogen that goes into the body and the amount that comes out, you can calculate how much is retained. And since nitrogen's only source is protein, you can calculate the amount of protein that you need. So that's how this is done. Now, however, as you start to age, you need more amino acids to repair the muscles that naturally break down as you get older. So therefore, the amount of protein that you need starts to go up. And then, of course, if you're doing regular exercise, weight training, strength training, etc., then that increases even more. But the ballpark figure that we're looking at based on your, your average weight, your age, you should be looking at 80 to 90 grams of protein a day. Okay, so how do we get that? Advertisers are keen to show you. You walk into any grocery store or supermarket these days, and you will see aisles and aisles of all kinds of high protein items, protein shakes. I mean, anything that you've ever heard of. There's, believe it or not, protein Pop-Tarts. There's protein popcorn, which was sold by Khloe Kardashian. And I mean, if you don't listen to Khloe Kardashian, who should you listen to? Ultimate nutritional guru. So there are protein shakes, protein bars of all kinds, and some of this just, things like the protein Pop-Tarts. Well, this is of course a marketing thing. And if you look at this protein Pop-Tart, yeah, it does contain some protein. They put some whey powder in there. But when you're looking at protein sources, you also have to look at what else is in there, especially sugar. So if you look here, you see that it has a significant sugar content. There's 31 grams of sugar, 31 grams of added sugar in that one Pop-Tart. You know how many grams of added sugar you should be eating a day? 40 grams. So this one Pop-Tart already is near the limit. So this would not be a good protein source. Then to go to our pal Khloe, who's pushing her somewhat cleverly named cloud protein. You see that it also has a sugar in it, which you don't need, and it doesn't have very much protein either. Then you've got Cheerios here that have upped the protein intake by putting some whey into there. But again, look at the sugar content. That's 11 grams of sugar. That's a lot in comparison to your daily intake, which would be 40 grams. But you do have to look at labels, because there are cereals that actually do contain a lot of protein and do not have very much sugar. For example, this one, 18 grams. That's a lot of sugar. I mean, that's a lot of protein. There's a significant amount of protein per serving, and only have 4 grams of sugar. You even have things like protein bread. Again, it is regular bread that just has some whey powder added to it. Whey is the stuff that is left behind when you make cheese. When you separate the curds, what you have left behind is whey, and it is mostly protein. So this is what they use in these commercial products. So if you look at this protein bread, you can see that it does have a significant amount of protein. It has 10 grams of protein per serving. That's a lot, and it does not have very much sugar. Then there are all the protein bars. And some of these are quite reasonable in their nutritional composition. This one here contains about 21 grams of protein. It has actually very little sugar. So this would be one that you might look at if you're trying to increase your protein intake and you're trying to get up to the 80, 90 grams. There are so many varieties of these though. I mean, especially if you go to Costco, the whole aisle of these protein bars. So what you need to look for really is the amount of protein in there. 20 grams should be really the minimum that you're getting from one of these bars. And it should not come with a lot of sugar. So your sugar content should be 3 grams or less than that. Yogurt is one of the best sources of protein. And Greek yogurt has the highest amount. Oikos is the classic one. And as you can see, this has 17 grams of protein per serving. But a large container like that is something like 450 grams, so it's not, we're not talking about the whole container. You can also get this in smaller amounts than this one. These little ones have about 9 grams of protein each. But you can find ones that have even more, although they're not so easy to find, like this one. That's 25 grams. That's a lot of protein. That if you add one of those to your daily food consumption, chances are that you'll be meeting your requirement. And these are also nutritionally sound, aside from the fact that they contain protein. Yogurt, as you know, has active bacterial cultures, which have potential benefits of all kinds. But you always want to look at the label, and you want to take a look how much protein there is. So there's 25 grams, that's good. But you also want to take a look at sugars. Sugar is about 3 grams. 3 grams is not a lot of sugar. Remember, we're talking 40 grams of added sugar a day is the maximum that you should be consuming. So 3 fits into there. Another way to up your intake is with a shake, and these are again nutritionally well balanced. If you take a look at this one, you're getting 20 grams of protein per serving, and it contains very little sugar. You even get some fiber with it. Then there are some gimmick or apparently gimmicky things like this protein water. Well, I say apparently gimmicky because it actually does deliver. I mean, if you look at the label, you see that it has 50 grams of protein.
If you believe the label.
Oh, I think you can believe the label. Yeah. First of all, in that way, there's no reason for them to cheat, because protein is not a hard commodity to come by, and so there would be no reason for them to make a claim that we can easily find it's not true. You even have protein pop, and that gives you 22 grams of protein. It has no added sugar. I've never tasted it in the mall, but there's really nothing negative about that. Again, you take a look at the label, 22 grams of protein, no sugars. They use stevia as the sweetener. Stevia is a plant extract, it's perfectly acceptable. So, although it sounds crazy, drinking protein pop or drinking protein water, the fact is that if for whatever reason you need to increase your protein intake, these actually do deliver the protein. But as usual, it's always better to get it from a proper diet so that you don't have to supplement these things. It can be done. Lentils, for example, are a superb source of protein. And these days you can get pasta that is made from lentils, which is really excellent. And of course, you can make your lentil soup. Depending on the size of the bowl of your lentil soup, 15 to 20 grams of protein. And plus there you're getting a lot of fiber as well. So I'm a big fan of lentil soup. Great source of protein, great source of fiber, and there's virtually no fat there. Now I told you that you don't have to rely on meat in order to get your protein. Soybeans actually have a complete protein. Soy has all of the amino acids that you need, and tofu is really it's sort of a vegetarian version of meat, right? And it has roughly the same protein content. And the fat that you have there is a more acceptable fat than the fat that you get in meat. It is mostly a polyunsaturated fat. So tofu, of course, you have to know what to do with. I mean, you don't just eat a piece of tofu. or you do it once in your life. But when you cook with it, it will take on the taste of other things. So when you mix it with beans, you mix it with lentils, or you make a tomato sauce and you put. You've got to do something with it. One maybe surprising way to really increase your protein intake is with the newfangled ultra-filtered milks. They're more expensive, certainly, than regular milk. And these are milks that are passed through a special filter that will remove some fat, it will remove some of the milk sugar, but it will concentrate the protein, which the protein does not go through the filter, so it's concentrated. So you can have about 20 grams of protein, again, a highly significant amount, from drinking a glass of this milk. And there are several varieties of this. The one that we see in mostly is the Lancia, but there's Fairfield. It's also a very common one. So dairy can be a very good source of protein. Milk, as I said, is, and so is cottage cheese. Cottage cheese is an excellent source of protein. Now, depending on whether or not you're concerned about your fat content, I mean, you can get cottage cheese, which has 4% fat, that's quite a lot of fat. But still, the protein content, as you can see, it's about 13 grams per serving. That's quite a lot. And if you want to cut down on the fat, you can also get the 1%. And that will have the same amount of protein. The taste will not be the same, of course, it will be not quite as creamy because of the fat that gives you the creamy texture. One surprising product that really delivers a very significant amount of protein is this. And you know, who would ever think that pancake mix would do that, but it does. It gives you about 14 grams per serving. And when you look at the list of ingredients of this, there's nothing objectionable. It really is, you know, pretty clean product. It contains whole grains, etc. And you have an added benefit here. Besides the protein that you're getting with this pancake mix, you're also getting a lot of fiber. And combination of protein and fiber is a very healthy combination. So, how are we getting all of our protein? We're looking for the 80-90 grams a day. A 10-ounce steak will do it in one fell swoop. Okay. You eat that every day, you don't have to worry about your protein intake. At least not for long. Now, of course, this is not to suggest that you should never eat a 10-ounce steak. Although I don't think there's ever a reason to eat a 10-ounce steak on 6 or 8 days. But anyway, I mean, you don't want to rely on that for your protein intake. But it doesn't mean that you can never eat a steak. So anyway, that would do it in one fell swoop, but you don't want that soup. Okay, let's look at some other things. A glass of milk will give you about 8 grams. But remember, if you drink your cooked with milk, that will double it. That will give you about 15 or 16 grams. A small cup of yogurt, 15 grams. A chicken breast, about 50. So see that it piles up, right? Now, whether or not you're going to get it from an animal source or a plant source, is a question of amounts. Because although I told you that plant products contain all the amino acids and they're totally acceptable source of protein, but we've got to eat a lot more of them than of animal product. So, for example, here's this ad, and this is produced by a vegan organization, you know, actually a militant vegan organization. But anyway, so here, your beef, 6.4 grams of protein per 100 calories. that's a true statement. Broccoli, 11 grams of protein per 100 calories. Now that sounds very good, right? 11 is more than 6. Most of you can figure that out. But
Big broccoli.
what you have to look at, that's for 100 calories, right? If you're looking at steak, that's about 100 calories. 3 bites, easy to do. If you want the same amount of protein from broccoli, you gotta eat a lot of broccoli. So although the statement that I just showed you in the ad is true, but it really is not practical. No one is going to regularly eat that amount. Now, it is true, of course, there are some high protein vegetables. And if you are a vegan or vegetarian, then you will know what those are. And you have to, concentrate on those and on eating enough of them. But the truth is that it is easier to get your protein intake from animal foods. Just statement of fact, right? I mean, 2 eggs will give you 13, 14 grams, depending on the size of the egg. You'd have to eat a lot of broccoli in order to get that. Now, in terms of the common foods that people eat, or especially my students eat, because I canvassed them, to try to calculate their protein requirements. So a hamburger will give you roughly 25 grams. Pizza, of course, it depends on the size. And when I ask them, how many slices of pizza they eat, we mean slices. They count by the whole pizza. Peanut butter is actually a very good source of protein. So peanut butter on high protein bread, that will give you 20 grams for a sandwich. But if you think that you really have done your calculations and you're not getting enough, the easiest way is to use a supplement, is to use whey powder, which you can blend into anything. You can blend it into soup, you can blend it into milk, basically, or make a shake of it, you can blend it into anything. But again, you don't want to overdo it. I told you that, yeah, we should be aiming for around 80 to 90 grams. But unless you're really into bodybuilding, you don't need more. Because if you take in more, like anything else, it gets converted into fat. So protein intake is important. You do not need to overdo it. You don't have to eat huge amounts of meat thinking that this is what is going to build muscle. What builds muscle is fat, is doing the exercise, as long as you're supplying enough protein. So protein is what stimulates the building of muscle, but you've got to do it, in combination with the exercise. Now, there's some question about distribution of that protein during the day. And this is not set in stone, but there are some studies that show that putting some protein into each meal is better than all your protein in one meal. That you get more absorption of amino acids if you separate the proteins into your daily meals. There's also another reason to look favorably on protein, and that is it will curb your appetite more than any other food. When you eat fats or you eat carbs, you crave more fat and you crave more carb. That's not the way it works with protein. If you eat 100 grams of protein or 100 grams of carbs or 100 grams of fat, you will be more satisfied. Your hunger will be curbed more by the protein. So you're less likely to put on weight. So it enhances what we call satiety. it gives you more of a feeling of fullness. But the one thing that I don't like to hear, and I'm sure you don't like to hear, is that as you get older, you exhibit what we call anabolic resistance, meaning that your protein requirements are higher because your body becomes less efficient at incorporating the amino acids into new proteins. As you get older, your body gets less efficient at doing everything. I mean, getting old is not a good idea. Doesn't really work. But so this is the reason, you know, that in middle age, you easily get away with 60 to 70 grams of protein a day, but as you get older, you need about 20 grams more than that. Now, to give you just a sort of an understanding, I'm going to use 100 grams as an example, which is probably more than what you need, but 100 grams would be fine. I mean, 80 to 100 grams, you know, this is how you would put together 100 grams of protein. So it's not all that difficult. See peanut butter on toast at 12 grams, trail mix gives you another 10 grams, there are 2 eggs. Edamame is actually a very good source of protein, that's of course soy. And so you see, it's not that difficult to put together. But you do have to pay some attention to it. You know, it's, and a lot of people don't. Well, how do you pay attention to it? You have to calculate. I mean, you have to do the work, you know, and there are tables, of course, easily available. There are apps that you can put on your phone where you just enter, you know, whatever you eat and it will calculate for you. So, yeah, it's important to take in that 80 or so grams. But you don't know whether you're doing it unless you do the work and calculate. Numbers are important. But also finally remember that it is not enough to take in that if you're talking about not allowing your muscles to waste away, or if you want to put on some more muscle, yes, you gotta eat the protein, but you also gotta eat the work. And as with everything else, the more effort you put into it, the better the results. So that's the story of protein. As you can see, it's interesting scientifically, historically, you know, how we know what we know, how we know how much protein we should take in, and how we now basically know the protein content of so many foods. So it's now up to you to do the calculation to see, you know, whether or not you are in the 80-gram ballpark. And many people are not. And I think you'll find that when you do the calculation, you may be short of that if you have 80 grams. Yeah. You gotta yell because it's very hard to hear you. Steel cut oats. Steel cut oats are great for fiber, for lowering your cholesterol. The protein content is not significant. Well, if it has a lot, it's because they're adding whey protein to it. You also have to look at the serving size, because sometimes it will show you protein content on the cover of the product, but it's how much?
15 grams.
Per
1 cup.
per 1 cup?
Yeah.
Oh, not of cooked oatmeal. Not cooked.
No.
Oh, well, yeah. But when you cook it, it's much less, because if you cook 1 cup of steel cut oats, it comes out to a lot of cooked oats. You're not gonna eat all that. Yeah.
Shows how to take it to lawful. Very but all natural ingredients and results very high in protein, fiber, etc. The other thing is, I've noticed I watch, of course I don't figure out all the wrong things, but in protein, fiber, of course, sugar, I use a lot of stevia, but a lot of the products have high
Yeah, well, sodium, that's a whole different question. Sodium, ideally, your sodium should be under 1,500 milligrams a day. Okay, which is certainly possible to do. But again, you've got to calculate, you've got to look at the numbers. Yeah. No, the ones I showed, the sodium content is under 500. Yeah. So, I mean, the basic numbers you want to keep in mind. Protein, about 80 grams. Sugar, the maximum added sugar, about 40 grams. And the amount of fiber that you should eat a day is 25 grams. These are the numbers that keep in mind.
How it is possible that people survive war and concentration camps if essential amount of protein is 80 grams or 60 grams? How does he survive?
Because your body is actually quite intelligent. And when you're deprived of nutrients, it will convert some of the stored fat and some of stored carbs into amino acids. But of course, you don't survive well and not for infinite.
But for a few years, if people survive war for
Yes.
a few years,
People have survived 60 days eating nothing, as long as you have water. Yeah, but you don't want to do that. You don't want your body wasting away because it has to use up all its stored food to make protein.
Some of the products you show has whey, and what do you do with your lactose?
If you're lactose intolerant, you've got to go for the soy protein. And that's as simple as that. Yeah. But the thing though is that whey does not necessarily have lactose. Because once the whey is isolated from the curds, it's only protein. So unless the manufacturing process somehow doesn't give you pure whey, but I think it's very unlikely that you react to whey protein into lactose.
Is there anything that can ease the absorption of protein? For instance, I believe having coffee with the meal impedes the absorption of iron, and that it's ideal to have coffee an hour after the meal.
There's no. With protein, the only thing you have to take into account is the amount in the food. It's not, you don't have to worry about it being not absorbed.
Okay, so do you eat coffee with the meal?
Sure. But why would you have coffee with a meal? You have a coffee after.
I mean, immediately after, or do you wait an hour? Thank you.
Quinoa is an excellent source of protein. Yeah, quinoa is a grain that grows in South America. But again, you've got to flavor it somehow. You have to mix it with something to give it some taste. But no, quinoa is very.
Eat salt.
So protein, you give us a dump again,
Protein about 80 grams. The maximum amount of added sugar, 40 grams. And the amount of fiber, 25 grams.
And the amount of salt? The amount of salt?
Yeah, sodium. In many books and articles, they will tell you 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day. I think that's too much. I think you should try to keep it under 1,500 milligrams of sodium. Now, one thing important to find out, we're talking sodium, not salt. Salt is sodium chloride. Okay, so you're talking only sodium. So when you look on the label, it will list it as sodium usually. Sometimes they will put salt. That will lead you astray. So 1,500 milligrams of sodium. What kind of salt?
Because they stay.
I mean, all this business of Himalayan salt, sea salt, whatever, total nonsense. Total nonsense. Salt is salt, it's sodium chloride. Now, in some, like in the Himalayan salt, you see a little pink color because it has some residual iron oxide in there, which is irrelevant. All right, we'll see you next month.